So I have a really boring administrative question. So we heard two examples of educational infrastructure, one at a med school, one within the physics curriculum at MIT. And I'm curious to know, in both cases, how much resource did it take? How many sort of person months of effort end to end to implement each of those tools is question number one. Question number two, how do you intend to make those sustainable institutionally, and who is going to take ownership? Because in your case, it came out of your research group overlapping into pedagogy is what I infer. And in your case, it came out of the instructional team within the physics curricular system, neither of which are part of the IT fabric of the institution.
Yeah, in my case, I think you're absolutely right that this should have a vision of sustainability in the future. I don't think that I have the best vision for it right now, how it's going to be sustainable, but it's still a baby within the physics teaching team right now, and we're all working on it together. And as far as like how much time did it take, I think it's always work in progress. Like I am the main person who's like programming behind the scenes, and I don't think it's a lot of work because I am mostly just prompt engineering and communicating with ChatGPT, OpenAI, but API. But I think it might have taken me around maybe 2 months to create the AI activity completely and have it like run correctly, with also building a front end design for it, like a user interface, etc. But you raise a very good question about sustainability. I think at some point, are you okay?
Yeah. We're falling into an MIT trap.
It's okay. I think at some point, like this field is developing very fast, and I think at some point MIT will have some kind of license for some AI scheme that is special for MIT. And I think at that point, it would be much easier to sustain if it's sustained at the level of the institute, which I think is going to happen. And then we just have to adjust what we have to work with the new technology.
Yeah, so in my case, it took me kind of 2 nights to program the chatbot on my laptop with ChatGPT code help. That was the first project that I did with it, and so it was really exciting. and with the voice kind of interface, that was all very easy because it's just calling API features and prompt engineering. But then it kind of stayed on my laptop until I ran into Simon, who works at the library as a data scientist, and who was also interested in that, and said, hey, I can build a really nice interface for you, which I have never done before, and I just didn't have the time to get into. So then he built that interface, and we interacted that way, and that worked really well. And it all works on Dartmouth servers that are already there. The compute isn't big. What we then need to do is find money for the API fees, which were kind of more, now that GPT-4 Turbo, they dropped a lot. And especially making it open access, we kind of put it together from different sources. So it's stable, I think, for now. But for somebody else to reproduce that, I think, especially within educators who haven't programming experience or experience working with developers in making that, I think there's a big barrier of entry there to make this as custom-based like you. And it might work in a physics department, but not in social sciences so much, or maybe in some of the life sciences. And then the other little app that you saw that made the case, there I just, I first made that on ChatGPT, right, for myself. But then I wanted to share it with my colleagues so they can contribute their own cases. And then I found out they all have to have an OpenAI subscription, which not everybody has. So then I went for for a personal route and this, sorry, a commercial service. What you saw there was just the same thing, but a commercial service, and you can just share that widget with anybody, and I'm paying for the API fees. So in a nutshell, I think, just as you said, this is developing rapidly, right? But I think an institution needs to invest in one infrastructure that everybody can use, not different infrastructures, and then having also maybe resources in terms of human resources of individuals who can work with educational groups and making that happen, to do it a bit more customized and advanced.
Let me just ask one follow-up question and then open up the conversation. I thought another interesting distinctive feature of what you showed was a voice interaction methodology rather than typing and reading. And do you just anecdotally have the sense that the medical students found that frustrating, or was, it's an interesting test case of what's an optimal interface?
Right. Yes. So usually it works really well. I think here was a problem because I've spoken to the microphone. There might be some back flow there that otherwise it's very good, and it reduces. It probably increases the length of what you say, but you can't do it on the bus, right? And we also have the voice back. I didn't show that, but the patient. All of a sudden it's a patient with a terminal disease, and it sounds like Siri, right? So that we're not there yet where that sounds really convincing. And you can read it really well to off too. And also there's a latency problem if you send everything back and forth so much, especially voice files. So it takes a long time. So eventually, I think if we can actually include emotional prosody in the generative voices that are then linked to the experience of the patient. I think until then, that would be fantastic, and I think we are getting there. Until then, I think the text does a lot of, it's really good. I think it's for most use cases, the text works really well.
So why don't we just open up to the room? Questions, comments? And we should make sure we include our remote hovering panelist.
Yes. So I had a question, and that actually follows exactly on the comment about the voice and basically the emotional part of it, because I was just wondering to what extent you want to how real do you want to make the patient, right? So so the voice is, of course, one thing. That means somebody who wants to be a doctor should kind of listen to the voice and then understand, well, okay, that person is in trouble, or is it real or is it not real, the way that they speak about it and so on. I'm guessing that's what you were referring to. Now, the other question is that when somebody goes to the doctor, you ask them about the symptoms, and well, if you have, Alzheimer's, then you get these 5 or 10 symptoms, and you basically probably somehow randomize them out of the selection of symptoms. But a person never comes with only one thing. They also have knee pain, and they also have back pain, and they might be completely unrelated. Do you actually kind of try to inject, let's say, that level of realism into it? Because, it's certainly possible, right? So, or is that at the moment not yet the case?
No, what you mentioned, this multi-morbidity cases, they do happen a lot, and of course you can put that into your, you just need a text editor, right? You just change the patient case file and include those in there, and the patient has them, right? So you can tailor that the way you want, and then make the case more difficult, more less difficult, easy cases, depending on the learning goals that you have. So, yeah.
Great.
Oh, snap. Thanks. I have 2 questions. The first question is about medical field to Professor Thesen. So I really want to know who's going to be responsible for the final diagnosis or medical suggestion from the AI doctor. who is going to be responsible for it? I mean,
could you repeat that?
Who is going to be responsible for the medical suggestions made by AI doctor according to American legal system? Because could be some class action settlements or kind of legal issues. Who's going to be responsible for those kind of medical suggestions? And another question to Professor Cavazzoli is that I come from China. I come from China originally, so Mandarin and Cantonese are my mother language. So every time in the US, every generative AI conference, when we talk about LLM, that the biggest advantage of LLM is that it could understand human language. But every time we mention human language, we mention English. So there would be some technological gaps between English native speaking countries and non-English speaking countries. So how do you think about this kind of technological gap in the foreseeable future? Thanks.
Okay. If I understood you correctly, you're basically asking about the opposite case where the AI is the doctor and you have a real patient, and how will that look like? Is that correct?
If a patient takes some medical suggestion from the AI doctor, something bad consequence happened, who is going to be responsible for it?
Okay, yeah. Then I understood you correctly. So in that case, I think in medicine, our threshold, or we need to be really certain about the diagnosis, right? And that the AI doesn't hallucinate, doesn't make mistakes. So that's really important. Then maybe in education or in business, not so much, depending, what you buy or something like that. But in that case, and there's a lot of skepticism, I think, in among physicians, and the medical field moves much slower with these kind of things in adopting new frameworks and paradigms than some of the others, which we're all grateful for. And I think, but that's happening. What you're saying, that actually the chatbot will could be a doctor, right? So Google Analytics or the Google research arm has just released a preprint where they trained their own model on patient-physician interactions and diagnoses and medical records, and they basically pitted that against the diagnosis of physicians versus a diagnosis. So they created those patients, and then they either had a physician who made the diagnosis or a family physician, and in some domains they report that actually the AI was better in that, in others not so much. So, but this is really a very current kind of, there's no consensus on that, right? And as I said, we need to really also educate our physicians and the doctors in these algorithms, in these methods, to kind of really be speaking on this and helping drive the development and implementation of AI in a really responsible way. But as you said, so this there will be clearances, there will be laws. This will be a big thing until we actually can do that. But what's happened a lot is people do get medical advice from there, right? People, we just saw here our Zoom panelist showed data where people say, oh, they get therapy through the bot, right? Things like that. So these are all very dicey issues that are happening, and we really need to look at this really closely.
And to your question, I would just add, I mean, I think it's an excellent point. I don't know that I have a very good answer, right? But I think it's an important point to flag the centrality of English, right, to large language models, and the way in which the size of the corpus on which things are trained can often be determined by the language involved. I think I would be sort of out over my skis in terms of the technical questions, except to say I'm optimistic, right, that there are technical solutions down around the corner. But if we're not cognizant of this, and I think this is the lesson of the 20th century, is that science was conducted in English, right, and we're living with the consequences of that. And I think in the 21st century we need to not replicate that.
So for Chris, MIT Chris, you had a sort of a taxonomy of different people's responses to generative AI, and I'm interested in the ostriches, but in particular, sort of a even worse group than the ostriches, which are the folks who they're sort of ignoring Gen AI. They pick their head up, they look at like one thing, they try a couple things, maybe in GPT 3.5, and they're like, this is just a total disaster, and they bury their head even further in the sand. And so I know a bunch of the folks who run the writing program at Harvard, and they have pretty much universally dismissed this as being at all helpful in students, getting feedback on essays, and their attitude is, well, even the best GPT-4 is not as good as my personalized essay feedback as an expert writing instructor. And so the result of this is they have completely dismissed this. And I just wondered, so how do you, so there's almost a worse, the ostrich is one thing, they're ignorant. Almost worse is someone who's gotten a little bit of knowledge and then completely rejected this out of hand because the technology for them today is not, what they would hope. So.
Yes, I think we know this creature. I guess we'll call this one the groundhog who sees the shadow, right, and goes back down for six more weeks of winter. Yes, we'll have a zoo before the day's over. And I think you're right. I think the example of that what that person says is they show up at any sort of venue at a university and they say, I hear that these things, they make things up. Right, and hallucination is a real issue, and it needs to be addressed. Right, but often when that point is raised, it's in order to slow walk the adoption of the technology or to undermine people's, sort of enthusiasm or in it or confidence about it. And I think we need to, sort of recognize the groundhogs, right, when we see them. And I think you're right. They may be harder to reach than ostriches in that sense.
What do you do with the groundhog?
If they're really good teachers, which is and they are, right? They're very good teachers for a different world. Then they listen to their students, right? And eventually their students will teach them that, in fact, no, I can't get out of you what I could get out of you and generative AI.
In fact, that syndrome was apparent in the bar chart that was put up from the survey of the Astro graduate students. So if you remember the bar that you put up on the top about the use profile, the use of GPT 3.5 was the biggest bar, but about half of that was taken up by people who sort of picked it up and looked at it and put it down again. And what wasn't clear to me was whether that group then migrated into GPT-4 or not. Because one thing that my colleague Matt Schwartz at Harvard has emphasized is if you make an analogy between the number of training parameters in GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 to the number of neurons in people's brains, then moving from 3.5 to 4 is like moving from the brain of a cat to the brain of a person. I mean, it's not a small change. It's a gargantuan evolutionary leap in the biological analogy. And so I do think, to my mind, this is why I'm a little bit apprehensive about universities making duct tape, less capable versions of these things, because we pay a huge opportunity cost. And I'm a strong proponent on our campus of giving everyone on our campus access to the most capable cutting edge technology. But I think it was really quite vivid to me in the graduate student survey data. There we have groundhog grad students, which is actually an interesting thing because our vision is that they're probably the forward-leaning early adopters on all things, but the data don't seem to bear that out. Question mark. I'm supposed to ask questions.
Yeah, so I actually have an anecdote for the groundhogs. I call them the naysayers. So one of my favorite ways to use ChatGPT is when I write a paper, sometimes I need to put an equation in it off of Wikipedia. And latexing up big equations is a tedious thing. So what I do is I screenshot it, give it to GPT and say, give me the LaTeX code. And the first time I did it, I was blown away. It made like one or two little mistakes that were easy to fix. I showed it to a naysayer, and the naysayer is like, ha, it got the exponent wrong. See, useless. And my response was like, let's have a race. Let's just pick some random equation and see whether me with GPT and correcting its one little typo can be faster than you typing it by hand. And I think just going through exercises like that and kind of showing them that just because it made a mistake does not like invalidate its ability to save your time and be more efficient. That's sort of my anecdote on the groundhogs and how to deal with them in some cases.
But I do think this motivates strongly some of the kind of assessments that we've been seeing, because the plural of anecdote is not data. And I think that's why I really do think we should step up and do hard-nosed evaluations, because at least in the physical sciences STEM fields, people are very data-driven. I think people will respond to evidence of educational effectiveness. And I think we should think ahead to what that persuasive evidence is going to be and do what we can to collect it.
So I want to ask about the inverted ostrich. So, talking about the head in the sand, but there's also the educators who are just barely keeping their head above water. And if I think about the last hype cycle that I remember trying to engage with, it was online education, and realizing the amount of time that would be needed to, make videos, or even trying to, do it on campus with flipped classrooms, doing things in MITx, coding things on that platform. It was overwhelming. Do you have a sense in which generative AI is, in some sense, an easier thing to incorporate in an educational context compared to things that I've tried to do in the past, where I can see the benefits educationally, but actually just the limited time that I have means it's actually quite difficult to incorporate, or at least incorporate in a way that's sustainable?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think there's the other. We've looked at a lot of custom-made student kind of driven learning approaches, but I think also it makes our, as educators, everything much easier, right? So in my experience with my students, we are creating these vignette questions, clinical questions, which are very intricate. 45-year-old male with back pain comes to the physician and all of that, and they usually took a long time to generate. Now, ChatGPT can do this really well, very quickly, and it gives you an explanation for the correct answer and explanations for the incorrect answers, which are pretty good. And then all I have to do is read it and make a few edits or something, and I can do this. If I spend an hour on this, I give my students much more questions than they can handle, and they do really appreciate that. So, and then to share that with my colleagues, I put that kind of GPT chat bot on a, that creates that custom made on a website, and then just say, hey, just type in a disease, and it does it for you, and then they're taking their head out of the sand a little bit and said, oh, that saved me some time, and it's not so bad. But I don't have any data how frequently they use it.
So Jesse, I think a lot of our time goes into course development and course management. And I think in both of those domains, this is going to be a really powerful tool for faculty, especially when you're making a course from scratch. That actually the ability to say, I want a 13-week class on the basics of, genetic analysis algorithms, and the target audience is second-year biology graduates, just whoomp, here's your outline, right? And similarly, give me 5 clicker questions for an intro physics course on torque and angular momentum. Whoomp, here you go, right? Now, there are these awkward copyright plagiarism issues that go along with that, but I think completely separate from the actual sort of mechanics of instruction facilitated by AI, I think there are huge opportunities for us as faculty in being more efficient in managing and generating large courses.
Yeah, so if you see me, I've been on my laptop because I'm trying to build my course for February. And I mean, I'm not aware of language models being able to generate Canvas sites with links to Poll Everywhere and things like that. Are those capabilities available? Because that in terms of that level of course management, that's something which I would love to have a tool that could kind of in some sense interface with some of the more traditional educational tools that we already have on campus.
So we certainly have conversations underway on our campus about how much internal developer effort to invest in the integration of these tools with the legacy instructional IT structure. And we have to my knowledge, not been successful in getting the vendors to tell us what they're doing, because we're worried that they're busily doing exactly the same thing. And I don't think we've arrived at a conclusion on that yet. But I would say this course that Logan and I are doing, among our institutional goals, is to try to identify that workflow and figure out where the gaps are and identify what it would take to close them. So I think it's a good question, but I don't have a good answer yet.
And Chris, just in terms of like thinking about online education versus this, do you have any ideas about the similarities or differences between that hype cycle and this hype cycle, and faculty engagement and the probability that the inverse ostriches will actually have time to invest?
Two points. One is, I am the bearer of bad news actually when it comes to time, to labor and effort. I actually think most of these things.
One of our speakers is fleeing the scene. We should thank. We should thank her. Thanks.
All right. Yes, AI doesn't have a solution for that yet. So yeah, I do feel like a lot of these are actually that good teaching takes time and effort, and I think there will be some things. I think it depends on the discipline, and I think fields where the generation of large numbers of problems, right, and that sort of that repeated aspect of things and iteration is really important. One. A second point I will make, just to the last exchange that you had with the other Chris, is and I can say this in a public forum, and hopefully they're listening. I do feel that Instructure, which is the company that generates Canvas, could be more innovative and more experimental and incorporate more AI opportunities than it's currently doing. And I don't know if they're cautious, right, and they want to do it right because they're very big and they want to get it right the first time. But obviously, those of us at MIT, we really depend on Canvas. And so, we watch and listen to see what they're doing, but they're moving relatively slowly.
So this seamless online integration that you're talking about, right, where Gen AI creates content on the fly, and I think we also have to be careful that there's still some human check in it, as long as there are hallucinations, because otherwise we also alienate our students if we give them wrong information and things, and it just frustrates everybody, and then they're rejecting that just as much as others. So I think something like that human in the loop, I think is still important until we kind of really have a level of accuracy there that makes it not necessary anymore.
Yeah, I have another question for the panel, but I would also like to hear the view of the PhD student remote. Is that we have talked about a lot of very interesting applications in which we build these AI models for teaching our students, but by design, we're going to limit them to do only, to not give the answers, to do specific things that we want them to do. But how going to make our students adopt these, where at the same time, ChatGPT and other companies are doing the reverse. They're building models that will do everything for you. So we have to convince our students to use the limited model that will not give you the answer, instead of you can just paste this into ChatGPT and it will give you the complete answer without you having to do the issue. So I'm curious how we can motivate our students to use the more, the models that require way more effort on their part versus the ones that companies and the public will be able to use at the same time. So yeah, I would like to see what both of the...
Sure. I'll take a first crack at it, but I also want to hear from Emma too. And I'll focus on the word cognition, and I wish that Mohammed were still here, because one interesting data point in his presentation, right, was getting students to reflect on what they learned, not just the ones who got it wrong, but also the ones who got it right. And only about 20% of the students actually did that task. And that task is called metacognition, and that is well documented as one of the best ways to actually learn, right? And so maybe the answer is you have to require the metacognition. And requiring metacognition is kind of the flip side of what our colleague Justin Reich in CMS here at MIT describes, that what generative AI does is it doesn't help you quote unquote cheat. It helps you evade cognition. Right, and that's the thing that we need to kind of, as instructors, need to either block or design around or or think through. So requiring metacognition is the flip side of evading cognition.
Yeah.
Emma? You're muted.
I think we need to unmute our remote panelist, if that's possible. Here we go. It's happening before our very eyes. Yeah, so actually, while we have this minor technical interlude, there's actually an almost high-level philosophical question here, which is, to what extent will we as people accommodate being totally dependent on having access to this technology, right? How much standalone independence do we require? Or is it okay 50 years from now that this people-computer fusion is what gets everything done, right? Now, you might argue we're at that dystopian reality already, and that if you take anyone under the age of 30 and hand them a map in the driver's seat of a car and say, please navigate from point A to point B, they have a hard time doing that. And what's funny about that anecdote is I'm not saying, oh, they don't know how to do celestial navigation, because I don't know how to do celestial navigation, right? So in this sort of generational evolution of what we expect people to be able to do independently, those expectations themselves evolve. But I think that's actually a central question for the educational enterprise, is what cognitive capabilities and what skill set are the essential components of competence in an era when you're able to avoid, in the long run, 50 years from now, these systems are going to be phenomenal, right? There's just no question. So what does that look like, and what's the role of universities, and what are we going to try to accomplish? And it's not too soon to start asking ourselves those questions, just to make this really dystopian. So do we get Emma?
Yes, I have been unmuted. And yeah, I think I can add to that, but I'm coming from the different approach of what can we use AI for now to automate all the things that we spend too much time on, so that we can free up more time for the complex cognitive tasks. But I definitely see how using AI to get over anything that requires cognition to be a challenge. But yeah, I think one approach from grad students, and probably undergrads as well, is just to use Gen AI for fun, for personal use, and just see what it can do now.
Suresh.
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. One is about how concerned are you about privacy when using Gen AI for healthcare or education? So for instance, for the patient simulation, I'm assuming you provide real cases for the model to simulate, right? Or to learn from to simulate patients. Is that correct?
So the cases are all made up, right? They're training cases. They're not based on real patient data, no identifying information. Physicians can make often cases based on patients they've seen, but I don't think it would be, there's no sensitive data there. So in that regard, I think that concern doesn't apply so much. But as soon as there's real patient data, I think then this becomes a very, very strong concern.
And I guess similar for education, real student data, if it's passed to these models, as unless you have a specific deal with these companies, they will use this data for their training. And so it's going to be potentially there is a way to reverse engineer and get the data that was used to train a model. So it basically exposes student and patient data potentially. Is that an issue that you're thinking about?
Yes, and if universities are not thinking about it, then they're in trouble. And this is where I do anticipate that increasing regulatory environment and a model for the for-profit or non-profit, basically any of the large language model providers will realize that if they want to work with universities, they're going to have to generate a version of themselves that is FERPA compliant, that can handle data privacy, et cetera. And it's just, but right now we are flying without a parachute, or whatever the phrase is.
Maybe could I ask Suresh you a question right in that kind of neighborhood? So when those language models, they create content now, right? In maybe 5 years, they create most of the content, and then they also ingest what they create. And if there's this loop of creation, ingestion, what will happen? Will they get better? Will they get worse? Will we all kind of stagnate in terms of information?
That's a good question. I've been discussing this with a few colleagues. It really depends on how much of the web content is going to be dominated by content generated by these models. But I think there is going to be some kind of a critical mass, like when enough of the information on the web is created by these models, then the next version of these models that are going to be scraping the web are going to be training on data generated by previous models. So not only is that going to limit their capability, but also it has this potential to basically miss out on, if you think of like you have a knowledge space, it's going to basically go to like a local area and just stick there, right? Because it's going to be it's going to be a feed-forward loop, right? So if by chance the generations of the previous version were more about one topic than the other, that's going to be ingested into the next model, and then the next model is going to generate even more about that topic. So that's what I mean by like kind of moving to like a local area. It's a really important question, but I don't think, it's not something that's going to happen soon, just given how much data there is on the web already. I think it's going to be a while before generative AI created content will actually reach a level where that would be an issue. But I think it's an important area to study, to kind of see when that critical mass may be and what we can do about it.
So just a couple of comments on the privacy stuff for a second. So, why do you think they give you access to GPT 3.5 for free? Answer, because they're getting something out of it. What do you think they're getting out of it? The entire exchange that you have with it, right? So we've done two things in this regard at our institution. One is our IT folks built, and Logan showed this briefly, a front end to a variety of GPT entities that our IT people tell us are in fact privacy protected. So faculty are told it's okay to upload grade sheets. It's okay to upload stuff up to some level of privacy protected data, not census data type stuff, but like one step below. And then separately, we did strike a deal with OpenAI to pay their premium service for enterprise level privacy protected, GPT plus access, but that's expensive. Now, it depends on what you mean by expensive. If you look at the budget of Harvard, it's a drop in the bucket, but there is no every cent is committed, and trying to find the new money to do that turns out to be hard. And one of the, so it's like, what about privacy protected data? What about patient privacy protected data? What about FERPA protected student information? What is the privacy status of work that students prepare in a course? That seems a little on the edge and no one seems to be quite sure. And then one place where we get a lot of pressure in the sciences is the IT people say, you'd better not upload any draft paper to GPT, right? And our answer is, but wait a minute, we do this on Overleaf, we put it on Dropbox, we put it on shared Google Drives all the time. And if you guys think we're doing privacy protected collaborative international science, you're just thoroughly mistaken, right? That this is no different than our standard practice. And I think that's sort of an ongoing discussion on our campus, but make no mistake, it's expensive, both in terms of money and manpower and training, to sustain the level of privacy in those other areas. Christoph.
I have a couple more, but you go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I just wanted to come back quickly to two points actually that were made here. So one was about, of course, what are we going to do in 50 years, right? How is that going to be integrated into, what do we need to know, and what does actually the AI really knows? So Chris mentioned well, today already, to some extent, we're kind of lost if it's about maps. I mean, if I want to go to a hockey game of my kids and I drive there, well, I just press the button and I'm going to get there somehow. While before I had to look on the web, and then I look at the instructions, and then I just like, well, it was painstaking. I mean, probably some people in the room might remember that time. Today, that's actually not a question anymore. So that's great. And in that sense, well, are we really at that point? Then there was the other remark by Emma, who said, well, I let actually AI take care of the tedious task, and then I want to go back to the cognitive task. So now if we take these two together and say, well, the cognitive task is what AI is going to be very likely much better than what you are going to be, right? So that means with maps, okay, we're not, I mean, it's going to be a very different situation, right? That means the very thing where our particular knowledge or our ability is going to be key is going to be taken away to some extent, right? So yeah, today we don't need to know how a car is built because, well, I mean, somebody builds the car and there's going to be some specialization. And I am assuming, well, there would probably have to be some people that are expert, at least in some very specific things, to make sure that things don't go against the wall. But they're going to be expert in things that are very different that today actually nobody is really worried about. And on the other hand, a lot of the work is going to be like, well, you sit down, you do the things that you want to do, and it's going to be very comfortable and easy, and you don't have to think too much. So I think probably something like specialization will be something that is going to be very important, and checking and controlling and making sure that things don't go wrong. But overall, probably creativity, I could easily imagine, might actually really go away in the sense of, well, finding out like the new laws of physics, well, to go really all the way. Well, I don't know. Are we going to be the ones? I don't know. So it's kind of a different situation that we're going to be in. It's not just like, well, we don't have to anymore look up the details of the maps, but there's going to be much more that's going to be more substantial to what we feel like very proud of as human beings. It's going to be probably taken away. So it's, yeah. Let's see.
So actually, let me ask a question in the room. So wake up. We're going to do an active learning thing here. A number of people have sat through a number of presentations. We've talked about the educational domain. We've talked about the research domain. How many people in the room think that generative AI is a disruptive technology that's going to change both of those areas? Huge selection effect, because that's why you came to this meeting. How many of you use it on a weekly basis? How many of you use it on a daily basis? There's something of an inconsistency here, okay? So let me ask this question. We've heard initial indications of it being effective at instruction. We've seen, I think, enough tantalizing examples of it being a powerful research tool. We've seen indications that it can actually do science. I heard Jack say, our brain is this big, runs on 20 watts. How are we ever going to compete with billion parameter trained supercomputer capable AI systems? And why the hell are you people not terrified about being put completely out of business? Yes, Kevin.
I was actually coming up to talk about that. I think one of the talks that I found the most impactful was the one that discussed human flourishing. And I think something to remember is, yes, these may be very good at doing physics and other things and may far exceed our capabilities, but why do we even do what we do? Like, is the generative AI going to decide that studying black holes is worth its time? You have to remember, like, part of what drives science forward is our own sort of passion and motivation to pursue a particular subfield. And I think no matter how powerful the AI becomes, there's still a role for us to play in at least directing it towards problems we've decided are interesting. I guess we could give it up and just decide the AI is going to drive the complete future direction of science and that we have no more role. But I think that's a key role that we still have. And even in its current stages where it's less capable, like, our role is to use it as a tool and guide it. And I think it will remain that way for a while.
So you're someone who thinks that we will have the illusion of retaining control.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe it will indeed just drive our direction. But I think for now, sort of, yeah.
Have you talked to Max Tegmark? No.
I mean, as much as we are in control today, right? The social forces, are we really making these conscious decisions? But in the talk that you mentioned from yesterday by the physics grad student, what I really liked is about this, that he said the focus will be on the human parts, right? And the more cognitive, technical parts, will be taken care of, and then we can focus on that. And that's also where we have to build our skills in that way. Making kind of the social sciences much more important, which we hadn't thought for a while. But at the same time, also people say, oh, this will give us more free time, right? I don't believe that. I think there will be a honeymoon period where those who use it will get their work done faster or do more. And then, but at some point, the capitalists will catch on, and then you're just expected to do just as much as you can within, your 12-hour workday.
I just have one more question. And actually, about this topic, I do think that, and I think some people will disagree with me, but at the end of the day, it is just a tool, no matter how advanced it is. And so you're controlling it, the human is controlling it, or you're guiding it. You're going to be guiding it in terms of which areas to be looking at and what to do. And yes, it might be at a level that, or level of competency that we have not seen before for a tool, but it's still at the end of the day, just a tool. So I don't think it's really going to, if you want to be lazy and let this tool do everything for you, you can do that. But if you're interested in studying a particular subject, then you can use that tool to help you study. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, so I wonder if we'll end up in an analogy with how we allocate other oversubscribed scientific resources. So for example, take telescope time as an example, right? So it's a precious resource. The cutting edge facilities are highly oversubscribed. We authorize committees of scientists to exercise their judgment and rank order scientific programs, and then the resources allocated in accord with that. So I could imagine a future where science is done by some gargantuan AI system, and there's a national committee impaneled by the NSF and the DOE and whoever else pays the bills, who sit there and point at fractional effort in one direction or another, and then we just kind of go along for the ride, whether we're groundhogs or ostriches riding on the back of this dragon, I don't know, but it could really end up there, right? And at that point, we're really just a value, we're projecting our values onto that capability, our scientific values, and that would be an interesting circumstance. I'm making all this up. Nick.
I have a comment related to what you're bringing up. So I think for a lot of people, the two main role models in their life, adult role models, are their parents, which is mileage varies for a lot of families. And the next is their educators. For a lot of people, they don't really have any other adult role models. I mean, for a long time, right? You go to school and then you go to university. And university is a big moment where you meet a lot of adults and you get inspired, hopefully, and you choose a career path, often by who inspired you. So for me, it was an applied math teacher. It was a great class, third year math, and we'd give him standing ovations, really great. I know my dad was inspired in neurology by someone around the end of medical school. I think this is true for a lot of people, and it was absent in these it's not on the resume of this conference, but I think it's something that you can have the greatest chatbot you want, but no chat GPT is going to inspire a kid. It'll enable, but it's not going to. I mean, why'd you get into astronomy? You must have been fascinated. I mean, well, physics can be a little different because the subject matter is pretty great, right? So the subject matter can get you a long way to the inspiration, but I think it needs people as well. I think the mentors and the maybe you read about them as well, right? Because there's stories of the great physicists. It's kind of you're part of a story. anyway, I think this is a huge part of education at like when people get to university, which it's not a bad thing, but I just don't think the topic of this conference touches it. But yet it's a huge, and so you're saying like, what do we do as yeah, so the whole physics department, that's a big part of their role, because a lot of the other parts are going to be covered by the next generation chatbot or whatever, maybe. So that, I don't know, it's not really a question, it's a comment I had. I had a more mundane question, I think, to Thomas. So in your talk, you did something maybe they hadn't seen, right? So you were saying you have an individual use case, and you for each use case, right? Like you made a prompt, which was the use case, and then that set forth the interaction. Whereas, like, I feel like the idea of people using it to solve physics problems, say, has more been along the lines of just ping ChatGPT directly. Is the idea that, like, is there benefit to having? So suppose you set a homework problem with five. I mean, let's face it, a lot of people repeat the same course, right? So you know, in week 1, I've got these 5 problems. Is the idea that, oh, we should set the problem and set a prompt? So I now have like a prompt, and so the students can solve the problem, but that prompt, which could be quite extensive, will allow the student now more, like, so it is a question, like the student can now, obviously using the prompt in the in-house manner in which I've seen at Harvard, right? Like where they don't see the prompt, they just see they're interacting with a chatbot who's always prompted. And then they're interacting with much more specificity about the problem that they're talking about. Or is that not beneficial, that ChatGPT will just be fine? ChatGPT-4 would already be accurate enough. It seems like you found for your use cases that off-the-shelf ChatGPT-4 was not accurate enough for use cases. You had to prompt it fairly extensively. Is that right?
Okay, so yeah, what we tried first to just tell ChatGPT, just simulate somebody with a typical patient profile of mild Alzheimer's disease. But then every time it would do something different. So we couldn't really control all the parameters. And sometimes it would maybe do things that we didn't teach in class, right? And then the students would be, not know what to do with it. And then also what we found then, as the conversation goes on, there's some drift and things change. It doesn't stay consistent with the first patient presentation. So that's why we kind of decided to kind of hard code it, so to speak, and always have it.
I see.
I
think they call it like
back.
You can have very long context windows in these things. But there's a sort of a claim that it's a bit U-shaped.
Exactly.
So it's at the ends that it's more accurate, and it seems to, yeah.
Correct. With retrieval augmented learning, you have that kind of dip there, and it's kind of interesting that it's like human memory. You have recency effects, things that you just heard, or primacy effects, the first thing you heard in a sequence, right? And the AI has a similar kind of U-shaped curve where it goes down in the middle. That all becomes muddier. Like if I ask you to remember like an 8-digit number, right? So you know the first ones and the last ones, and in the middle it gets like where people make errors. But what we did, we used the LangChain, which kind of does the vectorizing, embedding, and then send it with that, and we haven't hit any limits there. But I've used other configurations where after like 5-6 turns in the conversation, it just asks, oh, give me the case again, or something like that. It just didn't know anymore. It got lost.
Yeah, I guess my other point was like I find like I've used ChatGPT-4 for pretty hard problems, like pretty hard stuff, and it's good. But it can't be as good as like a excellent professor's surely going to be, like a good professor in electromagnetism surely going to be able to write a better prompt to get someone on track of a problem than ChatGPT. Isn't that what you're sort of asking? What's the professor going to be like? Surely they're still better than.
Yeah, I think we will be more than just prompt engineers in the future. I think that there's I mean, first of all, you have to guide the students, right? You have to create the environment. And I think that goes away from this idea, we all heard that the sage on the stage, but we're going to be the guide on the side. We create learning opportunities, we curate those, we're probably not the primary transmission modules of knowledge anymore, right? But we kind of create the conditions by which students can engage with information and then retain that and manipulate it. And I think that will also require us, I think, now in the Gen AI age, to create new pedagogical approaches and techniques, right? That actually leverage this. And for example, I mean, the simplest one that we all kind of heard about is take a ChatGPT, ask it a question, take the output and critique it, right? So that's a new kind of little kind of pedagogical method. And I think there will be others that we kind of should really think about. And some people will come up with really clever things. And then we do empirical evaluations on that to see if it increases learning or engagement or something. And then we will all be using it. Just like we happen with active learning and other techniques.
So I don't want to pour cold water on the 2 points that you made, one about mentoring and one about sort of excellence of instruction. I would say I cannot sit here and tell you that physics departments nationwide are exemplary bastions of great mentoring, okay? Which kind of leads me to the next point, which is we need to be thoughtful about what comparison metrics we're using. Well, I'm sure Christoph Paus would be a phenomenal E&M instructor. We heard from our friends at MIT that there are 700 students in that course. What time slice of the faculty member do you think they get access to, right? So I think the interesting thing is these systems alleviate a big capacity problem for us, right?
Oh, no, I was meaning, sorry, it wasn't precise. I meant more, so there's a homework problem and I'm pinging GPT-4 and it goes off the rails maybe a bit. Option A. Or option B, I'm doing the homework problem and Christoph has got a little question answer chatbot prompted by his extensive notes on that problem. So now when I'm pinging it back and forth, I'm secretly getting a bit of the instructor.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at when I said, at what level of granularity do we build these tutorial tools? Do we do it at the problem level, at the assignment level, at the module level, at the course level, or for all of statistics, right? And the answer must be some combination of all of those, but we're a long way from knowing what that optimum is. And it's a combination of prompts, uploaded domain-specific information that augments it, and the training data and whatever version of this thing that you're running, right? All those things, and the context, the prior history, all those converge to drive the output.
Yeah, let me just add one real brief thing. I think part of it is also, as you've raised before, is just we need to think about these long-term questions of what are we after in the first place. The example I give with that is tutoring, right? Everyone moved very quickly to the idea of chatbot tutors. They may relatively soon generate measurable positive outcomes for learning, but it would be very dangerous if we didn't stop to think about what is tutoring? What is a tutor for, right? And so are we sort of designing constantly assisted cognition, like having, the phone tell you how to get, how Christoph gets to the hockey game, right? Or do we want tutors that are like training wheels and that come off so that you can enjoy riding a bicycle? I don't need to, I could drive to the hockey game faster than take the bicycle, but I love riding a bicycle, right? But I never would have been able to do that if those training wheels, I don't want training wheels on my bicycle for the rest of my life. And that's the kind of conversations that we need to have as educators.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I would also like to add to this conversation why I really also believe that even if the models, are perfect, that I still think that the human in this whole conversation will prevail in the end as well. Because one of the things that I find very interesting is that the reversal, if you look at ChatGPT versus an instructor, because the whole way GPT is built or any of these models is that they are subservient to us. So when we are interacting with it, although this is this big oracle that we should be almost terrified of, is this a real professor or a human, we still feel very much in control, and we are actually leading the conversation. We're demanding what we want, and it will try to please us as much, but this is a complete reversal of if you talk to the big expert or the professor, you feel that you have to please them and show off. And I think a bit of this human interaction makes you also want to perform better because you are trying to prove yourself to the model, to the professor, whereas now the model is trying to prove itself to you. And I feel that this is not something that we can very easily reverse in just purely building a technology that can do that. And I think that is one of the, it's philosophical, but I think it's one of those very important components which will make it still critical to have people come to universities, be with actual other humans, because the fact that we look up to professors, but we don't look up to ChatGPT, we actually demand it to do stuff for us. Where, so you see what I mean? I don't know if you share that view, but I feel that that is something that will, regardless of how powerful these models become, we will always feel superior to them because we use them as a tool. So, yeah.
I think that's because we program that way. My program could secretly reverse if low. I think it could change. I think now the commercial companies, they are socially responsible. They make the program more abrasive to us, but it's easily changeable. If nobody, they control, the board of the commercial company, they are socially responsible. I think now it could be a problem, I feel. In early days in Microsoft Office, some programs secretly actually implement some tips that they try to be innovative. It's not in textbook. The basic program manager don't want to do that, so they do that.
So I wanted to come back to actually something that was said before about the role model. Also here again, the way that we actually interact with the large language models, and kind of came to my mind that the learning experience is actually something that's very human in a sense. So, like if you, for example, look at the learning sequences in 801. They're basically dress rehearsed, I don't know how many times until actually everything is perfect and there's no mistake in everything and everything is just kind of beautiful. And that's, of course, exactly what we expect from the tutor, right? The tutor is just right. It does everything correctly. We're at the moment worried that there's something wrong, right? But in reality, well, that is kind of what we expect. But part of what the human will actually react to in particular strongly is actually the imperfection. Meaning, often enough, I hear or you read in the comments about the fact, okay, the professor was wrong and he was actually discussing this and he could explain why he was wrong. And basically, you see the moment where actually there's an emotional reaction that happens while you're actually in the classroom. And that that hooks the student on something. So I'm not claiming that this cannot be reproduced by a tutor, but it is actually an element that is rather important. I mean, I have sometimes people talk with students get this imposter syndrome, right? They think, oh, I'm in the wrong place. I suck. I'm really terrible, and so on. And I have found that sometimes when you go to the class and you tell them, look, I mean, this is really hard. I remember when I was a student, and you explain to them actually things that don't really work very well. That's actually something that's quite effective to get them hooked into a topic and makes them actually feel better about themselves, which is really important because, well, if you feel good, you can actually bring the best out. So that's actually an interesting aspect that I just realized that I think somehow should be included in the way that we kind of do this.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, this has been a wonderful symposium. I've learned so much. My name is Aaron Pilarczyk. I'm a staff member in the physics department at MIT. Fairly new. I joined just last fall, 2023. And I help with primarily with junior lab course, along with Sean Robinson, the 813, 814 courses. So I've been thinking a lot about how we integrate AI possibly into that course a little bit, but it's great for brainstorming for we're going to integrate AI into education in particular. But one thing I wanted to talk about, I was recently at the AAPT meeting in New Orleans, the national meeting, and we were very surprised how little content there was on AI and education there. There was very little, and it was at kind of a very basic level. There was like conversations about how it could be the end of the world, or just basic things that were very didn't go very deep. So this has been wonderful to hear, and it just is making me think. We have another AAPT meeting in Boston this coming summer, and it'd be wonderful if we could bring some of this content to that meeting. So it seems like we have the right people. I'm definitely not one of them, but from hearing all the talks. So if anybody's interested, please, feel free to chat with me afterwards around campus, or even contact AAPT, because I'm sure they'd be happy to have this kind of discussion at the national meeting.
Yeah, so thanks for that thought. I think that's a great pivot point for us to start talking about what are next steps for this community. And I think, adjacent sessions to professional meetings like AAS, APS, AAPT is certainly a viable thing for us to talk about. So maybe we just thank our speakers for the day one more time. And